Look, I wonder if you could start by reading us a passage from the book, just so we can get a sense of the voice and the texture of the writing.
Absolutely. It's lovely to read from a book that's obviously been read, which is wonderful. No, genuinely. So this is called Best Chips in Town. The book happens over a lot of short episodes rather than chapters as such, so I'll just dive right in. Slouching over the cockpit, or whatever you call it, the wee box where she sits, the Bjorn and the shippy, saying salt and vinegar with her eyes glazed over. See, it's not even a question, more of a statement. And the troglodyte next to her just starts pouring salt and vinegar over me chips. Just mechanics, all repetition and muscle memory. At the same time, though, who doesn't like salt and vinegar on their chips? Rat King cocks his head and smiles at me as if to share in a joke. We go in and sit in one of them wee booths at the back of the Europa to eat our chips. Rat King has a batter burger too. Europa does a great takeout trade, but there's usually no one in there sitting at the back, except a few hopeless old lads whose lives got away from them somewhere along the line. Just sitting there staring at peas or egg and chips, prodding them from time to time, wondering what happened through the mist in their eyes. So it's a good place to talk, because them ones don't notice nothing at all. This time, though, there are all these fucking kids screaming and running around the place. All the same, I don't mind, because that way no one can hear you. Not even the El Misty man. Dead annoying them kids. But still, I can't help feeling sorry for them, having their birthday party in the back of the fucking Europa. Class chips, though. Rat King looks at me and says, "You thought about the job, did you?" I sit back a bit. I tells him I did. And I found a way to do it without making much noise. He doesn't say nothing, just shoves half the batter burger into his gob, pulls off a bit and brings it to his jacket pocket. I watch it and the flap starts bulging. It's that fucking rat, his nasty pet rat. And it just peeks its head out, looking somewhere between scared and vicious, and grabs the meat and disappears back in. He brought the fucking dirty rat with him into the restaurant, for fuck's sake. I says to him anyway, 10 kilos of the pure-driven stove, that's too much to be getting rid of in Ireland without folk asking questions. Well, you could get rid of it, say, in 100 grams a go, but that'd take too long, pain in the hole. So I says to him, I'll take it to England. Now, I'd never been to England, really, but he didn't know that. I didn't much like the idea of going to England, but I reckon 10 kilos over there would only be a drop in the ocean, sure. I tell him we go on a wee road trip. Pack the stuff into the sides of the car, the doors and that. And sure, I just roll off over to Liverpool or Holyhead or one of them places, down to London, offloading a bit here and there as I go. Best way of avoiding attention back home. Rat King sets a real serious look at me. I didn't know you had a substantial network of contacts in the UK. It always sets me head a spin when the Rat King does that. He switches from talking normal to talking like he was presenting the 9 o'clock news. See, the Rat King, he's an educated chap, has a degree in French or economics or something, so he does. Fucking clever bastard too. Still, it's mad to see him switch things up like that, especially with the pocket bulging away on him, the dirty yellow rat that's in it, sure. I tell him I don't, but Annie has loads of contacts over there in England. She's been there loads. She went to some posh boarding school there and she's been clubbing and all that. She'd love an excuse to get back. She's pals with half the coke dealers over there, so I'm making. And I said we can get rid of a half kilo at a time, I reckon. I tell him this and his brow goes all mad naughty on me. I told you not to be fucking telling anyone about this, especially not Annie. I didn't say a word. I'm just saying, that's my idea. I'll get rid of it in England and she'll help me. And she won't know nothing till we're over there, right? Just trust me. He calms down, thinks about it. That's the thing, see. He's not like other people. He can actually think. I tell him all I need is for him to just give us the go-ahead. Just then, a gaggle of them kids burst out of their boot, squealing and chasing each other. They run into our table, knocking over the Rat King's drink. One of the wee girls falls over on the ground, sure, and the Rat King leans over to lift her up, because sure, she's crying and that. The mother or auntie or sister or whoever's in charge of them all, them kids, comes over, all sorry, and thanks and sorry and that. The Rat King lifts the wee Bjor up in the hand, and hands her over. And sure, you should have seen the look on her face, the mother, auntie, sister one, when she sees the nasty old half-ear chewed off him. And just then, the rat pokes its head out of his pocket. Pure horror show in her eyes, like they all clear off, the lot of them, and half of the chips still on the plate char. Then we're left in silence. Just the scraping of some old fella's fork off the plate, the only sound in the place at all. Rat King looks at me proper serious again. Just do what you think will work, but for fuck's sake, do it quiet. Don't say a word to Annie about where it comes from, okay? That stays between you and me. Annie, I wouldn't have her selling fucking Smarties for me. He stuffs the last few chips in his gob. I'm not really happy to have him talking about Annie like that, but I say okay anyway. Fuck it, sure. Job on, I says to him.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Thank you very much for that. I suppose the word I want to start with is the word picaresque. The idea of what form do you use for a novel? You know, in other words, if you base a novel on a plot, then you have to keep tightening the plot, keep making things plausible for the plot. You know, keep working on, is this necessary for the plot? But with the picaresque, you can work with voice, and all you have to do is send someone on a journey. And it doesn't really matter if they get there or not, and it doesn't really matter what they achieve there. The whole point, it begins with Don Quixote, is how much fun you can have going the wrong direction, how much fun you can have misunderstanding everything you see. And the whole point then is you can get into, I suppose, that you can get in the voice a sort of comedy that can come anywhere you want it to come. And you can also make pathos. You can also make extraordinary levels of emotion anytime you want. So I suppose the first question I want to ask you is, can you just treat what I just said as a question? And, say, is this novel you have written, Mr. Cassidy, would it be part of the picaresque tradition? Is that a good question?
Yes, a great question, yeah. And I suppose, I think it is. I just wish I had known that when I wrote it. So I'm delighted to be here and to have read this piece, which I've never read in public before, that particular section. But I sort of decided recently that I should sort of be kind to the different sections and read amongst them a bit more, because I tend to lean on a few that I'm like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure this is good, so I'll just keep reading that bit. And, hopefully they won't notice. Hopefully they'll buy it. But, of course, that's exactly it, And for me, the entire essence of Iron Annie is that it's the voice of Aoife. It's her trying to reconstitute, what was, in a lot of ways, a very damaging thing, but also, I don't know, exactly as you say, plot in that sense to sort of suggest that there would be a kind of a central learning, and I think that this is, it's, you can do great things with that, but I found it much more interesting to sort of get into this world of empathy, to write a character that's very different from me, ultimately speaking, has had different experience, and sort of is it her own person? I suppose the other thing is that any Irish novel is a flag put up over a place. And often that place is very, very specific. If you could go through all the writers you can think of and think that Ireland is never the question. The question is the exact town or the exact city. Or sometimes then it's a flag over a sensibility. A sensibility you can both use your own, or you can work with one, you can invent one. But I suppose that the first question, there is really a question this time. Can you just, the great, the painter Patrick Collins talked about Irish light, the light he remembered, as being an unmuddied stream for a painter, meaning that Cézanne had not been here, Matisse had not been here, Constable hadn't been there. So he could work as though no one had worked before. And it strikes me that Dundalk especially
has a tone and a sort of texture that has not made its way into the literary tradition in any serious way, and therefore it's wide open for you. It's a lovely gift.
That's
Dundalk.
what I thought too. You know.
So could you describe Dundalk to us?
It's all there, folks.
I mean, I can help you. The town's not like other places, though. Dundalk's alive. The town remembers, knows how to hold a grudge.
Yeah. No, I suppose I think like I grew up there, but more, and I, you know, especially as a teenager, I had a very sort of intense connection to the place. And then I left, you know, which was the sort of, you know, like a lot of small, medium-sized towns in Ireland. You grow up, you leave, you know, maybe you come back or don't. But I sort of did in after a decade being abroad after college, after all that, and sort of discovered after, you know, I'd lived in Paris. I did a doctorate at the Sorbonne. I was having this incredibly, you know, enriching life there. And yet it was very stifling, you know, because exactly of this question, everything had been done. And if you wanted to write a novel, you'll never achieve, you know, what they did in the 18th century, never mind the 19th century, and nobody even talks about the 20th century. So in returning to Dundalk, kind of slowly and in drips and drabs, around the year 2016, 17, sort of, I realized that, you know, some people who had stayed there or returned there were doing kind of, especially in the realms of theatre and music, such very, very bloody interesting things that you know, I realized that in places where you were so burdened by kind of by precedent, you don't get away with, and it sometimes results in creative genius. And I sort of wanted to give that a go with the novel, hence Iron Annie. And
you get the town's like a safety valve for the rest of the country,
which I think is true.
And yeah, well, could you expand on it? The idea, the whole idea of El Paso, the whole idea of, you know, your safe haven. All those things that come from the Troubles and come from being a border town.
Well, I think there's no better place to talk about sort of the border sort of sensibility than here in Donegal on the border. And I think there's a lot of shared experiences. Dundalk is a little bit different, being on the East Coast and sort of on this corridor between Dublin and Belfast. But I just mean to say that a lot of the kind of the lessons or I reflect on that a lot, and especially did in writing Iron Annie, that kind of the inconveniences and the difficulties of the border were sort of a boon in the sense that they allowed for the creation of an entirely unique culture. You know, we love to complain about the border, but it did give rise to an incredible sense of humor, you know, which people here will be very aware of. Because what else are you supposed to do? You have this massively inconvenient thing running through your life, you know, literally in a lot of cases. So you have to get on. You have to live with it, and you know, then that extends into other things. Sort of smuggling is the great one everyone talks about. But I'm interested in this as kind of like language, humor, and community sort of triad that I sort of see it as having created in Dundalk, and that sort of resides, that survives, you know.
I suppose the question of language arises then, doesn't it, where the sensibility and the what I'm talking about, the flag, comes in the shape of words, and comes especially in an idea of a living speech, that you find a living speech that has not found a literary tone. And then you begin to mold it. You know, it's not as though you're just writing it down raw. You're finding ways of making the most, I suppose, most common type of speech into a sort of sour poetry.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
That's a question as well, course. By the way. Is it? Are you know?
Am I? Yes.
No, but no. I suppose the question would be: did you find anything in earlier novels, or if not even novels from anywhere else, that gave you a sense of what could be done with the speech of the speech of Dundalk?
This is really interesting because, I mean, people would often sort of say to me afterwards, "Oh, is this sort of inspired by Irvine Welsh then?" Or somebody like that. And I had not, I swear to God, I'd seen Trainspotting. I hadn't read it, though, until after I read Iron Annie. And I don't think it's really ploughing the same furrow at all. But, you know, it's a great book. But it wasn't exactly that. I was more trying to capture the sense of place, in a sense, and to make Dundalk a character. It's very interesting because I have recently finished my second to be published.
It's a great title, by the way.
Novel, which Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we could talk a lot about that, but we're here for Iron Annie, I suppose. But the title, you know, Tooth and Nail, when that came, it really sort of was like, oh, now I know what the book is. Yeah. After 3 years torturing myself, I knew what it was. It's Tooth and Nail. Okay, great. Which is trying to do different things as well. But in the case of Iron Annie, it was very much sort of like, at that time, Dundalk felt so alive and so essential to me that I wanted to conjure it and to make it a character in the same way Aoife is a character, in the same way Annie, Shamie, Racking, Dundalk's there too, as a living character in the story. And so that was more, rather than sort of anything political per se or anything sort of, I can't really speak to what other people were trying to do.
Is there a shadow novel, a novel either written or imagined before this book, in which our young man goes to Paris and contemplates various existential matters, and then realizes that actually that it's Dundalk, you know, that Dundalk becomes for him a sort of haunting presence? Did that book ever get written, or did it ever get imagined before this book?
Yeah, when I was 21, I wrote a novel, very in a sort of a feverish way. It was a beautiful experience. I recommend it to anyone who would want to do that. You know, just go and get rid of yourself on the page. You know, and then you're over. And then I sort of did another kind of warm up for Iron Annie, which was nothing to do with that, but it was set in Paris. And then I just sort of realized that wasn't what I wanted to start with. And yeah, not a shadow as such, but let's say a warming up. And there was a bit of time between the sort of getting rid of myself on the page thing and then the warm up for Iron Annie.
You're saying that Tooth and Nail helped, that the title, which often happens, the title really gives you a sort of sense of the form or sense of what you've actually been doing all along. Did Iron Annie, could you just talk about beginning the book or beginning to imagine the characters or seeing how you would use A, the living speech, B, the characters?
Is very specific. I was at a workshop in Scotland at Moniach Moore, and there was a Welsh writer, Niall Griffiths, who had sort of said, you know, we're going to do this workshop with a simple prompt. And
did he write? What's the title of one of his books? I was going to say, and then I thought, imagine if I got that wrong. But he wrote a novel called Sheepshagger, didn't he?
He did. He wrote a lot of great novels. But, you know, it wasn't even him, but another participant, a very kindly, softly spoken Spanish woman living in London who said, you know, I think you should really you're so nice, but just let loose, be vulgar, you know? And when I did that, I wrote the first page of Iron Annie, which remains the first page of Iron Annie.
You wrote it there and then?
There on paper.
That day?
That day.
Yeah.
Almost word for word.
You mean you went back to your quarters after that workshop?
You know, in the workshop, he said, we have 15 minutes.
Ooh, you always feel that 15 minutes is a waste of time for everyone, you know?
Yeah.
Like I've done those workshops. You feel, now everybody settle down for 15 minutes. They hate it and you hate it. Yeah. And it's a sort of way of just...
time eating.
Yeah, it really is.
Exercise. And it was the only workshop, like that week was the only week of this sort of thing that I ever did. But it was really important because it gave me that page. And in that page, I had Iron Ann, and the voice of Aoife, and I was like, "Whoa, who's this? I need to find out who this is." And 6 months later, our nanny was there.
Yeah. So. I mean, part of the pleasure of the book is the casual humor, is the way in which you're moving along and you're following her voice and you're following her response to the world and you're following her journey, and then she says something outlandishly funny. And you just sit up all the time. Or she says something, as you say, outlandishly vulgar, and you just go, "This is so great." I mean, that you act. I got nothing but pleasure from her. But the question of the rat, it used to come up. I used to teach creative writing a bit, and often I found myself saying to students, "I wonder if your story, if you just put a rat in, in other words, that as she went up the stairs, a rat was coming down, that you would get, the readers." But Samuel Beckett has it in Company, where, there's an old man and he's lying on a bed, and it begins, "A voice in the dark." It's that's not the first sentence, but it's more or less the scenario, that he's alone in the dark and he's looking for company. He's thinking about company, and he often says, "What good company that would be." And he suddenly thinks, "A rat." And the minute he says a rat, you can hear him liven up. And your rat is one of I think it's the greatest rat in Irish writing, which I think has a lot, in other words, if you think about it, every time this rat appears, I mean, I've marked all the rat passages. I got excited every time I came across the little creature. And he is tamed, but he is also, he plays a great, I think, comic role in that, at those meetings, he brought the dirty fucking rat with him to into the restaurant. You just go, "He brought the rat." And talk to us. I mean, I suppose what I'm asking you is that whole idea of you're writing a passage describing the selling of drugs, the moving from Ireland to England, the whole business of the town, and then every so often a piece of pure mischief comes on the page. And you can feel your pleasure in writing it, and that is what's given to the reader. And I suppose I'm wondering, did you cut much? Did you add much? Did you find yourself at draft level saying, "I need one more joke, one more thing has occurred to me"? How much was added? How much was left out of that sort of material?
Yeah, this is terrible, because I mean, and I've just gone through the other process where it's like you write numerous drafts and it's very wrought and worked, and I can say, yes, I really earned my bread in that sense. But with our nanny, I think we got one section of it, but otherwise that was it.
But otherwise, you're talking about written in a sort of white heat of
yeah, it happened in a very short time as well, over 6 months, and then it was done. And
could you describe to us where you were and what your circumstances were?
I was in Slovenia. I was mostly in Ljubljana, and which is the capital of Slovenia, beautiful city. And I would go daily to these various lovely cafes when I had an hour free. And write, and sort of it was because I didn't have a lot of free time. I was pretty busy, and I sort of really wanted to get this out. I needed to get it out. It was really frantic like that. And I suppose I should also say that at that time, when I was way out of the literature scene or hadn't published a word, You
hadn't written short stories?
No. I mean, I'd written some, but I'd not done anything with them. So it was sort of just very me in isolation in Cap. I did have two great flatmates, two women from there who were very literary people and were also very helpful in kind of like keeping me right vis-a-vis, okay, you're writing a female character, you idiot. Let's go, and they would just, they were very, very smart and kept me right in that sense, yeah.
I suppose if you're setting a novel in Dundalk, it's really important to deal with cliche. In other words, to leave it out. In other words, all the things you know, someone's going to tell you such a novel would need, such as a big IRA scene, you know, a big sense of, you know, arms across the border, of you know, how close it is to Crossmaglen, and have a Crossmaglen scene with the British Army coming out of their barracks. And you didn't do all that. I mean, you really were careful not to put in sort of obvious set scenes.
Thanks. I suppose that also the timing of when the novel's set does play into that. And I suppose there is a character there who's in the IRA, Paddy, you know, and I just sort of like, I wanted him to be like, there is a larger than lifeness to this, and I wanted him to be simultaneously the type of character who you're likely to meet, who is taking themselves very, very seriously in terms of their importance in whatever, but also sort of you can't really take him seriously. When you're reading him or when you're encountering him in real life. So, yeah, I didn't want it to be that as well, because the story really is this sort of picaresque, emotional story about the two women and Dundalk and the kind of the context, their network of relationships. In that sense, even the drugs. And I'm terribly sort of, anytime I remember doing an event with a book club in America who had thought it was a crime novel at first, but decided to stay with it because they liked it. And, you know, crime is a genre with its own specific kind of conventions, and people expect certain things. And I knew I wasn't giving them that. That wasn't what it was about in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems all of us have, I think, with language, with just with words in Ireland, is that no one in the rest of the world understands them. And for example, if you put J, he was a big J. You know, even, I mean, I have to say, AI. Did you have that, where an AI man at home was someone working for a vet who did AI, and he was called an AI man. And they were often from outside the town, and they'd arrive, and they were young, and they'd be in the pub, and they were sort of they had money, and they were good looking, they were young, and they were called AI men. And so it'd be very hard to put an AI man. It's very hard to put the word vet into an Irish novel, because Americans think it's a veteran. And then you've got Jay, you've got in the car, I've got Mochra na Firma. I mean, trying to explain someone who's a debater for Mochra na Firma, what that would mean in Ireland, into a novel where you've got an American that is saying, can you give me this Mochra thing? And also the real problem is the word police, because we don't use the word police. At least I don't use it. You say a guard. Then a guard looks like someone who was guarding something. And are you meant to explain this? James Joyce in Ulysses doesn't. He constantly puts in names of you know, proper names and names of things that are completely Irish, and that you have to have a big glossary to understand. And so, I mean, take me through, for example, the word mulpen. It may not be a Donegal word. It's certainly not a Wexford word, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Mulpen. But you have the word in. I Googled the word today. No, there's a family called Mulpen, and they're not helpful. And they're not pleased either, by the way, this Mulpen family.
Really?
No,
okay.
I made that up. But I mean, in general, could you take us through the idea of glossary? This page ends on page 301. There is surely somebody wanted a glossary.
No.
Wow, you're so lucky.
Which is really, I think, well, I did try to sort of structure it in such a way that when you would read it, that you would get it as you went. You know, if you stuck with it, you would get it. Which is also funny that you mentioned Ulysses, which I think everyone needs to mention at some stage. Really, I just
sorry, cliche.
No, but I do it myself. But it's exactly that. It's like, dive in, don't worry, you won't get it. Read it 15 times, you'll be grand. And it's really that thing of letting it wash over you until you kind of accumulate the knowledge to navigate it. And mulpen is this sort of like that. It is a word, people say it, but it's really very, very specific type of an idiot, you know. So it's like, right, you know, yeah. And it's not widely used, I should say.
And you weren't tempted to put a note at the beginning saying some of the attitudes and expressions of the narrator are not those of the author. But no, I mean, that's a joke, but I'm being serious, where there's some really, really good and accurate stuff about guards. I mean, police guards. I mean, you get... most guards are just looking for a quiet life and early retirement. Why else would you become a guardian? There's the only ones that are a real pain are the special branch. Bunch of trigger-happy hillbilly mug savages raised on a diet of Dirty Harry and brown sauce. So there you are. Kelleher's different from your average guard. Brainy and dead sound too. But I mean, that whole idea of the Irish police who have been provided such entertainment for Irish novelists, from the third policeman, even sad guards like the sergeant in John McGahern. Nonetheless, their presence in that world of being in between, for example, in your novel, you have the guard, the woman who she's actually drinking with him. She's actually in the lockdown. There's a guard included inside rather than banging to arrest you. She's
in the lock-in. But I think in the lock-in.
Did I call it a lockdown?
Lockdown, you did, yeah. Sorry. Because
Thank you.
That's it's set before all of that. But I mean, but that happens up and down the country. I think that guards are drinking in lock-ins with dubious characters. I don't think that's a fiction as such, but
no, I mean, you're getting a sort of energy from those things in Irish life that we really notice that couldn't be like that in any other country. And because it's a border town, you're getting an extra energy from that.
Totally. Development.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, something very special. And if it ever does get completely sort of extracted from the country, we'll have nothing left to give to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant about reading out the passage on page 81, but I will. It says, "Fuck me, could I fuck a guard?" Maybe it's different to her being a detective and that. I'll have to think about it. I have to say, I'm just like, oh God, I've never, you know the way you get to my age and you think you've thought of everything. I honestly had gone through all the years without ever thinking about that. And there was a real pleasure sometimes in finding, like there's stuff about Leo, the current Taoiseach, but then there's a mention about his predecessor.
Yes, it's right.
And it's tremendous because I've never ever thought of putting anything about Letterkenny into a novel. Like it's just he just didn't lend himself to novelization. I mean, he's very nice, but nonetheless, there are a lot of little things like that in the book that you just go, wow, this guy is what I think Henry James. Was it Henry James that said a novelist needs to be a born noticer? And there's this sense of noticing tiny little details about Ireland and making them into, just 3 sentences in the book that really lift you as the reader, thinking, wherever this young woman is going, I don't care whether she goes to England or she goes to France, as long as she goes on, as long as she has more things to say. And so you must have had tremendous fun giving her that sort of wit.
I would sort of say that, I mean, how she came to me was almost fully formed, and who knows really what that process is, but, did I give her the wit? It seems like she's a lot wittier than me, honestly. And I've no problem with that. I'm like...
Yeah, I mean, the views on Dublin as a centre of paralysis, the views on Cork...
Centre of paralysis is a Ulysses
I know what it is, okay, but the one on Cork, she's a fucking linguist, so she is. You can even understand people from Cork and that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, well, the real capital.
And you say on page 175 that Ireland, that the mixture of misery and the crack makes for particularly a sort of interesting energy. But the novel has that, doesn't it? I mean, the whole idea of the more like they're doing this they're selling the drugs for money, and they're all broke and they're all stuck. Is that right?
I suppose, like in terms of research, geez, what do you say about that? I think that this is not. That part isn't too far-fetched, I should think. In like small towns, obviously drug use, abuse is a serious topic and all the rest, but there is a certain type of character who's sort of not in the serious level, really. They might think they are, but they're not really, and just kind of like doing it to support a lifestyle. And this has been borne through in any sort of even literary research that I did in terms of reading accounts of sort of people who get into this.
And then, of course, I've left out the main aspect of the book, which is that it really is a great love story. And that it's a tender love story, and that there's levels sometimes of obsession, but also of the effort of Aoife to notice the loved one, to just keep watching her and thinking about her and describing her, a sort of obsession. And so you could easily miss that, in going on about all the rats and the guards and the
I feel like we should say it's a serious literary work, Colm. No.
Yes, as well as being a comic novel, you actually have underneath it that you're not being comic.
Well,
about the love story.
I would sort of put it to you that this was who was this said this about Ulysses again. But speaking about Ulysses as a comic novel, and this was a moment several years ago that I remember thinking, because again, in my sort of shadow days of being a ponderous pain in the ass in Paris, sort of thinking, I'm going to bring Nietzsche into something that seemed really smart. It's not all that interesting necessarily, but what the power of a comic novel is to make you feel like life is worth living, And I think a novel like Ulysses is very instructive in that sense. In some small way, I wanted to achieve that with Iron Annie, because though the love story that you talk about, really damages Aoife, obviously, I suppose I'm not really giving much of a spoiler when I say that, but it's not an easy one. It is, her after the fact telling this in this obsessive circular way, which totally instructed the way that the structure is working. It's this circular structure of picaresque going back and forth in time, getting sort of dragged ultimately to the fact that she doesn't really want to admit to herself. And comedy is the only thing in that is keeping her going and actually brings her out the other end in the end. The comedy, which is just life, that we keep going.
Did your work, doing a PhD, being in the Sorbonne, reading deeply in Nietzsche, did this help you in any way? I mean, in other words, is there, in all that reading, even rejecting things you weren't going to use or bother with again, that you'd done in your studies?
Yeah, I had a marvelous time, and it was an incredible experience that I sort of half fell into and half kind of wanted to do. I mean, I did absolutely want to do it when I was doing it, but I realized as I did it that I was doing something because of my supervisors, who were incredible people, and they kind of allowed me such a degree of freedom of expression and research and so on that I would probably never be allowed again in an academic environment, and that ultimately the things that I was searching for could only be found through fiction writing, and that's where I had to go. Right. That's what I did.
And you were doing a PhD. Could you just describe to us what that was about?
Narrative anthropology of collective memory, taking the context of the Northern Irish conflict.
Was that particularly in relation to the border, in relation to Newry, to Dundalk, or?
It was more sort of a narratology of sort of the process of radicalization over a long period of time. So I was dealing with kind of the case of people who had been involved in that for long periods of time, who had gone in and out of jail, and kind of what sustained them. And it was ultimately story, And
was your thesis based on interviews with people?
Interviews and a kind of a literary aspect to it as well. Story, folk song, dealing with graffiti as sort of a narrative form in a sense as well. Anything that you can call narrative, which is actually very huge, I would say.
Right.
So there was a big kind of theoretical aspect to that as well.
Yeah.
And sort of both of those led me to a point where I was like, oh, okay, now I've kind of dealt with that and I want to keep going, but in a different direction.
Yeah. So what you're writing here, in fact, is a novel of aftermath. That in other words, instead of writing, the aftermath of the Troubles. In other words, you have the what's it called? The PSNI? here rather than the all you see. You know, it's now. It's a world where people are much more likely to get arrested for selling drugs than they are for having Armalites.
Yeah.
So that you brought it on to the next phase in a way the research you didn't do because you couldn't do because it hadn't happened yet. You are imagining a sort of future for your own thesis. Is that far-fetched?
I would sort of like to leave them be in their own brackets. I mean, I sort of after finishing the doctorate, I realized that I had answered certain questions that I'd always been curious about, and that the way in which I was doing it was more, in that case, a question of methodology, and the sort of methodology that I had developed was a very literary one in the end, and that for the questions that obsess me now and obsess me as I wrote Iron Annie, the only way to answer those questions was Iron Annie.
Right. And we're noticing, I wonder if you're noticing as well, with writers such as you and Emer McBride and, say, Anna Burns, writers who seem to be attempting to make it new, to find a new form, to use language in a way that is, let's say, you know, textured and worked over and ambitious. That as though, just take three of you, but you being one. But looking back to the beginnings of modernism, looking back to the moment when Joyce had to realize that he could not tell the story in a simple chronological way, that 24 hours was actually more useful than 5 years, or that things happening, that the whole business of how to deal with time, how to deal with language, how to deal with story, how to deal with character had to be re-examined and, you know, worked over and made new. And that, you know, that this is something that you clearly been doing. And you were talking earlier about Emer McBride as someone you admire.
Totally. And Anna Burns, I mean, I'm delighted you mentioned her as well. Yeah. You know, I think without them, I wouldn't have written Iron Annie, not in the same way, for sure not. And
so you had read A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, you'd read Milkman.
And the other works, yeah. So, but especially those two really kind of inspired me to sort of revisit modernism and kind of then go back and actually reread as a more adult person what you can do with that and what you can aspire to. And I suppose that sort of, for me, this sort of triad, I want to call it a triad for some reason. I don't know why this word slips into my mind, but it's kind of like character, place, and language, you know, that is at the same time particular, universal is the same thing. I kind of came up with ontological and epistemological, this sort of way in which we as humans are always grasping for a connection, and language is one of the tools that we have at our disposal. And this kind of idea that there's a particular language which I developed for Iron Annie, or which is heavily borrowing from the Dundalk vernacular, but which is not the Dundalk vernacular as such, is a particular type of kind of ontologically linguistic tool to grasp towards that.
Could you just gloss ontological linguistic tool for us?
What I'm saying there is that it's very specific. It's using language always having this kind of like specific bounds. Like the English language occurred 500 years ago, and at some point in time it will stop. We're using it now in order to communicate and have a conversation and to describe the world around us. But, you know, all through human history, there have been different languages doing this in different ways. And the idea that kind of obsesses me is that there's this kind of thing that you encounter in other languages, in Latin languages particularly, this idea of the language that is particular and the language in general. Language which could describe something much more universal in the end of the day, if only we could speak it, which we haven't yet managed to do.
And where does standard English, what are we going to do with the English sentence then? You know, in other words, that surely what you've done and what the other writers we've mentioned have done, no matter what way you look at it, is political.
I suppose, but I would say the evolution of the English language, which is something that which people tend to look at as a very neutral thing, is not. You know, it has its own specific roots and whatever that are all political, right? And the fact that we're in Ireland, in the northwest of Ireland, speaking English is political. You know, even if we speak in a very sort of standardized way as we're doing now, I don't. You know what I mean to say there?
Just funny. I suppose that the politics comes out of silence as much as it comes out of speech or energy. It comes out of lack of energy. That you could draw a line and you could bring it up from Mullamore, just over the border, Crossmaglen, going up in towards Newry, Portadown. And I'm still looking for noise. I'm still looking for a sound. I'm still looking for even a short story would do me if it came before Christmas. You know, in other words, we haven't had a novel from Portadown, have we, or from Newry?
I know a good poet from Portadown.
But I'm just saying that you know that you come out of silence. You know that this.
Well, that
this texture,
I mean, you know,
its energy comes from the fact that its energy had not been mined before. Is that true?
I mean, I don't know of an example as such of that, but I sort of did also, because it I mean, then you get to the topic of inspiration, and it really inspired me, especially having been where I was immediately previous to that. I was like, this is incredibly joyous and kind of like living, even if it's not literary as such. I want to make it that. I want to play with that. I want to have fun, you know, because it made me feel alive at that time in a way in which, like, I sort of hadn't grown up in Dundalk. I sort of thought, oh, well, we're kind of the, what people, you go to Dublin, you tell people you're from Dundalk, half of the time they look at you like you got two heads, you know, still today. I mean, less so, but definitely when I was in college, it's kind of like, oh, from the wastes, oh, terrible, you know. Yeah. But
you got your revenge.
Yes. Wait till you read my next book. It's fantastic because a good part of the first half happens in Dublin.
Okay.
Yeah, it's glorious.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Colm.